can hear me okay. Yeah, so we're standing here at the first build site on the Puerto Rico farm. Um, we have 80 acres of land that spans a hillside with a few different flat areas. It has a couple natural streams on it. There's currently 50 cows that are keeping the jungle away and maintaining the property. And we hope to build the building that we're standing in over the next couple of years. This is the structure is 6 3-bedroom apartments across 2 different structures that have a lot of common space, areas for co-working, a gym, commercial kitchen or shared kitchen, and lots of covered outdoor space. And so these buildings were designed with Numena, who we collaborated with on the concept study as well. And so the idea for the property is to turn it into a working organic farm, to have a lot of fruit trees, particularly, and really looking forward to talking today about how to do it alongside permaculture and use that as our landscaping as well. So yeah, we're here to kind of get a little bit our hands on. It's our virtual hands on and walk through kind of the basics of permaculture and talk about some plants that would be appropriate for this site and some trees and how we can take this raw land that we have now and turn it into a thriving farm over the next couple of years. And so I was recently introduced to the speaker today, Stephanie, on a chat group in Puerto Rico where we have lots of families, lots of folks that are interested in organic farming, and many that are actually actively, planting and cultivating. And so I was introduced to Stephanie and heard about her work, and she is working on her own farm that's about an hour from our site. And so lots of parallels. Look forward to hearing all about her story today. And then we'll have some hands-on workshop stuff toward the end of today's call. So with that, I'll pass the torch to Stephanie, and yeah, really looking forward to the presentation.
All right. Hi, everyone. My name is Stephanie Syson. Can you hear me well?
I can hear you. Yep, I think so.
Excellent, excellent. All right. So I've been doing agroforestry and permaculture for around 20 years. This is my first time in a virtual version of it, so you'll have to give me some leeway. Thankfully, I have Ryan and Nick to mastermind the whole thing. Today, we're kind of going to have a virtual version of what we would do in person as best as we can. And to start out, I'll just give you a little background about me and my work. I started practicing permaculture and herbalism and other different types of forestry and agriculture models a little over 20 years ago, down in Latin America for quite a few years, and then transitioned to Colorado. I managed and worked with the Central Rocky Mountain Permaculture Institute for about 10 years, which I still am active with as a board member and as an instructor. I'm actually in Colorado right now, teaching a permaculture design course we just wrapped up. I really focus heavily on community interactions. We did a lot of work here with opening up a seed library at the local public library. We also took a public park and turned it into a permaculture edible community park. So it's just like a regular public park that everyone has access to, except it has 200 different species of edible and medicinal plants that people can eat and enjoy. That is called the Basalt Public Food Park.
Yeah, it is a bit.
People saying audio is glitchy.
It's a little bit glitchy yet. I don't know if it might be too many things loaded up on your computer or something. But one thing we could try is maybe just rejoining if you just want to reload. Sometimes that fixes it. I noticed that sometimes if you change your window back and forth, sometimes it does make people's audio skip. So We can still hear you. It's just a little bit skippy.
Okay. So I'm gonna dive in. I see someone playing. Oh, Ryan, were you saying something? I couldn't hear you.
I was just saying, yeah, we should keep going. It was cutting out a little bit, but I think it's good enough to hear.
Okay. So I see someone playing the video. Does everyone see the video playing with all the beautiful flowers?
If you don't see a video, you can click the magnifying glass in the top right of it, and it will open like a full screen version. And these panels behind us are also videos that you can play.
So the one that's playing over the pool, there's just music, so the audio doesn't matter as much. This is a project in Colorado called Biodynamic Botanicals, and it's a 5-acre medicinal herb farm for wholesale bulk for apothecaries and product lines and things like that. That was a project we did about 7 years ago. It's still operating today, albeit a limited capacity, because about 3 years ago is when I moved to Puerto Rico and started our agroforestry project there with a nonprofit called the Caribbean Agroforestry Institute, focus on education of all permaculture, agroforestry, and other sustainable agriculture models. Very hands-on, lots of multi-day workshops. So this is just rolling through our old project in Colorado with all of the beautiful herbs, which we have a lot of in Puerto Rico as well. The other videos you have to the back side, if you turn away from the pool, are the current projects in Puerto Rico. As they go from left to right on your screen, it's kind of the progress on the site. We bought this 35-acre site about 4 months ago. It was abandoned for quite a while, just had a few cows on it from a neighbor, maybe 5 or 6 head. We started building. The structure you see there is going to be a community kitchen. Second video where you see the bare earth is a pretty heavy slope, maybe like a 20% slope. And that's right after we made our contour lines, which we'll talk about a little bit for our plantings of our agroforestry system. And you can skip around to some other videos and see a little bit more about the site. The last video there on the right is about where it is currently, maybe a couple weeks ago. And you can see the rapid growth. Obviously, we're in Puerto Rico, tropical climate, and so things grow very abundantly. And what we're going to talk about is how to build an agroforestry system and what agroforestry and permaculture are, and how to utilize them on your site to create abundant food systems that are resilient and are able to produce a high amount of marketable crops, as well as feeding your family and your neighbors. So if we can all step into the room behind those screens.
This is a good chance to do some onboarding for spatial. If anyone hasn't moved around in here before, you can move around with your WASD keys on your keyboard to walk around. You can also click on the ground, and your character will walk to that location. So right now, we're all going to practice moving inside the doors into the space here with a slide presentation. And I'll let everyone try it out. If anyone's lost, I can yank you to us. So give a shout if you can't find where we are, and I'll help you out.
If anyone has any questions to start out while we're waiting for everyone to get into this room, you're welcome to type it, or I don't know if mics are on.
Yeah. Typing questions in chat usually works great. If you have any questions, don't feel free to type them in anytime. I'm going to yank everyone to me just to make sure we all found the PowerPoint. All right, we're all set.
Awesome. So I'm going to go into this PowerPoint. Let me know if everyone can see.
Yep, it's right up here, by the way. Turn
Look
around.
at guys. Okay, I turned me around
Yeah.
too.
And if again, for new
You
people,
yanked me over.
yeah, if you're new and you have a mouse, you're using mouse and keyboard, if you scroll your wheel all the way in, you can go into first person view, might be able to see easier. I think yeah, that's one way to help. You can change your view around with your mouse or your arrow keys.
All right, I'm gonna get right in there, and some of these slides do have some charts that might be hard to see in this format, but I'm happy to give folks access to this slideshow so that you can utilize some of these charts or look deeper into them at a later time if you want to really dive into the nitty-gritty details. So Caribbean Agroforestry Institute is our nonprofit down in Puerto Rico. We research, demonstrate, and educate in agroforestry and permaculture design, syntropic farming, lots of other words that all mean lots of food production in ecologically sound systems. So I'm going to start with permaculture. Ryan asked me a great question, agroforestry and permaculture, like what's the difference and where do they overlap? I would say permaculture is the container that agroforestry can fit under. Permaculture is a design system, but we can design forests, we can design farms, we can design businesses, we can design schools, we can do lots of different design work. And what we're going to dive into today and what I focus on a lot is more of the plant systems and the animal systems under the broader permaculture design. So we do permaculture design outside of the nonprofit with our for-profit for folks as well who are looking for their land to be designed. So in permaculture, this is one of the key elements is the principles of permaculture and the ethics of permaculture. We're not going to go into each one, but throughout the presentation, I'll be talking about different ones. Observing and interacting is one of the first, and that's just really absorbing the information from the site. That's observing with your eyes, with your skin, with your heart, with your mind. It's also doing research. It's also talking to people. It's also soil samples. So those are all types of information gathering, and that's really the first step in any project. Is we don't want to think that one system is going to apply everywhere. A system might apply great here in Colorado and it won't work at all in Puerto Rico. So we really need to observe the actual site and the people and plants and systems we're working with on the ground, and then we can start to develop our strategies. Another one is use small and slow solutions. So a lot of times we want the biggest bang for our buck. We want to move, even though we can move in a large way when we have the right data, we really want to get into a site and do the smallest change for the greatest effect. There's lots of others in here, and we'll talk about them as we go through. So we'll dive right into agroforestry. Agroforestry is a sustainable land use system. So we're taking the wisdom of a forest, the layers of a forest, the way that a forest maintains itself, and we're applying that to agriculture. So we're taking our crops that are either marketable or valuable to us for food and sustenance, and we are utilizing the model of a forest system. So some of the characteristics are focusing on perennials, which a perennial is a plant that comes back year after year after year. We do have annuals that are in the system at the beginning when there's lots of light available, when our fruit trees aren't so big, so that we can really maximize space and yield. We want multi-story, so as we build the agroforestry systems later, you're going to see how we have ground covers, and we have something in the mid-story, and we have something in the overstory, and all of these plants work together to create a really dynamic system that maximizes use of space and use of microclimate, so that over time, while agroforestry systems are a little heavy on the front end as far as design, as far as implementation, over time that labor phases out and you move more into just a light maintenance and harvesting system. So we're using succession in this, so we're mimicking a natural ecosystem. If you go from bare ground and you just leave it, the forest will eventually come in. It's going to come in with annuals, biennials, perennials, and over time, it's going to move into a forest system if there's enough resources like water. We want to mimic that succession, except utilizing the plants that we desire that have some kind of financial or food value or pollinator value to our system. This is a little bit of a blurry photo, it looks like, but this is an example of a young agroforestry system. You'll see these pioneer trees, these really tall ones that get up really tall very quickly, creating a little bit of shade, creating some biomass and some habitat. But in this system, there's so much space in between the tree rows that this farm has decided to use the alleys as annual production. So there's like brassicas, broccoli, lettuce, things like that that can live in these alleys while there's enough light. So you're able to get food, you're able to get monetary value in the space that will one day be this agroforestry system. So real quick, there are some advantages and disadvantages to it, but overall, an agroforestry system is what we propose is the most advantageous, both for financial gain, as well as your personal joy of working in the shade, as well as to the environment, to the pollinators and birds. But it is, like I said, a little bit heavier on the front end. And because we're working with many plants in a space, it's a little bit more knowledge intensive, and it's a little bit more complex in its management styles and timing. But because of that, we're able to have a lot of gains that a regular monoculture wouldn't have. One of those I mentioned is the early return on investment, the food or the financial reimbursement that's coming from these earlier crops in the space. So you're able to pay for labor for managing this space with these early crops, as opposed to just paying to manage a space for 5-6 years until a tree crop starts to yield. It also offers a lot more resilience to your weather extremes. When you have diversity in an agroforestry system, you might have one of your crops get taken out by, us down in Puerto Rico, maybe a hurricane knocks off all the fruit or takes out a young tree. But if we have root crops in the system, they're much less likely to be affected by that, and so we'll still have a yield or we'll still have food. So we're really, in permaculture and in agroforestry as well, we're really looking to focus, we want to know what the elements do and how they fit together, but that fit together part is the most important part. It's how the elements work together or don't work together that's going to make these functional connections that allow the forest to have a life of its own that takes care of itself, as opposed to you forever having to be the one fertilizing, having to be the one weeding, having to be the one bringing in pollinators, pest control, on and on. So there's all these management things that have to be done in a food system. And if we design it right, over time, the food system is getting all of that done via the plants and the organization that we utilized design phase. So just a couple of slides of what's happening in a forest system. So instead of having to come and fertilize every year, which often in many places relies on toxic fertilizers and chemical fertilizers that we don't really want in our system. Plus, it's just ongoing labor. You have to do it forever and ever. Every year you're doing the fertilization. It's washing down into the riverways. There's all kinds of downsides to that. If we design properly, the nutrient cycling within the forest, just like a natural forest, happens on its own. So we're utilizing different crops that bring in, like fixing nitrogen is the large tree in this system. It's also dropping leaves, and so that helps to mulch the soil and prevent weed impact, as well as feed the mycorrhizae and the bacteria in the soil. We also want to pay attention, they say, and I also practice biodynamics, and everything matters is one of the key phrases in biodynamics. And one of the basic ways that affects our plants is the sap moving with the moon. So the sap comes into the canopy of the tree during a full moon, goes down into the root system during a new moon, and how that's going to affect our management strategy is a lot of times with pruning or harvesting. If, say, you're harvesting a root crop and you want it to store and last a long time, you're going to want all that sap to be out of the root system, because that allows the root to last longer after harvest. Or if you're pruning a tree and you want that tree to bounce back, or what we don't want it to do, they call it bleeding out. So if the sap is all up in the tree limbs and you go to prune it, it's going to waste a lot of its energy and its resources in trying to heal that wound with the sap, and it does a little too much, and then they call it bleeding out, so it weakens the tree. So we want to pay attention to all the things in our environment, and that helps us make decisions in a really wise way. So we'll dive right into the second part. I know we're moving kind of fast, but we're going to do some of this not live, but virtually, and we'll build one of these systems. So I'll move through some of the key concepts, and then we can move around and get into the space a little bit. So this is just a little flow chart on how we go about implementing the system. So we're going to do the site and market evaluation if we intend to sell our crops. We're going to do a goals and a risk assessment. We're going to develop our crop plan, our installation plan. We're going to source our materials, and we're going to implement and manage that system. And at each phase, we're going to reassess, we're going to reobserve what's happening, and we're going to adapt our plan based on the local environment, whether that's our funding, we ran out, or we got a bunch, or we thought we were going to be able to plant this certain plant, but there's no propagation materials around. There's not enough seed or planting material. All of these stages are opportunity to reassess and readapt. So some of the basic things we're going to start out looking at on our site is, rainfall, wind direction, your soil type, your area, what other crops are growing, how well are they doing, what's the existing vegetation on the site, because that's going to be able to help us understand a lot about the soil quality and the wind and the weather. What's the topography? Is it a high slope? What's the aspect? Does it face north? Does it face south? All this information gathering phase. Where's the water? Is there a well, a spring? What's the nutrients available? So one, in the soil, what already exists, but also for us in Puerto Rico, there's abundant dairy farms where you could, in theory, access all of this manure. So it would be amazing to build your system, except a lot of the dairy farms by us use a lot of herbicide and different chemicals. So while there is this abundant source of nutrients available, it's not something that we would like in our system. So we have to figure out a different nutrient cycle that we are okay with bringing in. And then access to machinery and labor. These systems take effort, and they need people and machines to help, depending on how big you're going, to help you reach your goals. So we want to know what's the availability of that, and start, lining up our ability to implement. The next thing we usually move into is our SWOT analysis, looking at each site. Every site is going to have strengths and weaknesses. Every site will have threats and also opportunities. And a lot of times in permaculture, they say that the problem is the solution. So we want to think about what we're observing as a problem and see if there's a way that can become a benefit. So for instance, in Puerto Rico, we have a lot of activity with slugs and snails and things like that. So what we usually end up bringing in, especially to an annual garden, because they can affect those pretty heavily, is ducks. Ducks are amazing. They love to eat snails. They love to eat slugs, and they get a really nice protein source out of that. And ducks don't eat plants. They're not going. They might eat some seeds off some grass, which is also great, but they won't mess with your cabbage, for instance. They'll get under there, get under the mulch, and look for the bugs and eat those. So it's a really great pairing. This is an example of a threat. So on our site, and lots of sites in Puerto Rico, we've got a lot of slope. There's a lot of risk of erosion. There's a lot of risk of losing the water. So we have a lot of water, but if your site can't hold it, you're still at risk for drought, even in places that get huge amounts of water. So something we utilize a lot are the vetiver grass, and plant them on contour, on slopes. They are helped to hold the slope together. They stop the erosion. They end up collecting all this organic matter and over time making little terraces that slow and spread the water. So this is a living example of how this roadside slope is protected with vetiver. This is a really aggressive planting. You can utilize them on a little larger spacing, and you can do your tree rows right in between your vetiver rows. So the vetiver can go right into the agroforestry system. It also creates mulch that you can chop down and throw it right onto the ground. This is just an example of a crop plan. As I said, you can have access to this and you can dive into these plants a little bit more if you would like to do so. But you can see the different layers, and we're going to keep talking about that throughout this session. We've got our low ground cover layer, we have medium. They all provide different amounts of shading. They all have different plants. The other thing in this chart is you can see it goes from less than 6 months. So these are crops that are going to feed you or create monetary value in a short period of time. And so we're stacking all of these plants together in space and time. They all go in at the same time. And so that you're able to get yield after yield after yield after yield while you're waiting for your hoba or your mango or your cacao to come into production. This would be an example of an agroforestry system at 2 to 3 years. This is a banana, obviously in the front, lots of different other species, and then you can see it 7 to 10 years later as it fills into the system. So in those first couple of years, you can plant the alleys with your corn or your lettuce or your ginger, whatever crop you want to come in early. And then over time, that shades out and you're more reliant for food and income from your long-term species. This is a living picture. So you see papaya, banana, then you have these grass alleys in between. You can keep them grass, mow them, and use them for mulch, or you can utilize this for, at this stage with this amount of shading, especially in the tropics, something like lettuce or arugula would be a valuable crop in here. It's really going to appreciate this more gentle microclimate and this dappled light instead of getting roasted by the tropical sun. So as you saw on one of those earlier slides, one of the things about an agroforestry system is it's a little bit more complicated in especially the early management. So some of the species you're going to put in might outcompete. So we want to always be making sure that our long-term valuable crops like cacao or mangoes are doing really well in their younger stages. Is there enough biomass? We don't want to be hauling mulch from far away on our property or having to bring it in to keep the soil covered. We really want to grow that biomass plants right in the space. Do the trees need pruning? For fruit production is what most people think of, but also down in Puerto Rico would be thinking about wind resistance in hurricanes. Or here in Colorado, we like to prune fruit trees because one of our biggest risks is bears that climb the trees and break them. And so we can prune a tree to hold the weight of a bear. So wherever we are, there's going to be some risk to these trees, and we want to utilize our management to help those trees adapt to the risk factors to the site. Are there animals eating them? Diseases, insects, those are all opportunities to diversify the system and add or remove something so that we can really optimize it. These first couple years are really important to be very, very invested in the site. We really want to move 4 or 5 years down the road. We want to be really mostly out of the system from a management perspective. We really want that system to start managing itself and us to just go in periodically to observe and harvest and do little minute changes. And that's our opportunity to tweak the system. At first, we're kind of dialing a radio dial like, oh, what about this? And there's all these options and all this diversity. And over time, we kind of settle right in on a station and it's all clear. Hopefully, I'm clear as well and not glitchy anymore. And then are we getting vigorous and healthy growth? If not, there's a reason for that. And so we just need to troubleshoot what that is. All right, so kind of wrap up the slideshow here. This is the example of a permaculture design for a home. So we're integrating the home system. In permaculture design, we use the zoning system, which is zone 1 is the place closest to your house, and we move out from there. We're going to be imagining all the things that would affect an agroforestry system in a home system as well. And we can do within this, there's annual gardens, there's the larger agroforestry commercial farms, there's all kinds of different elements. And like we talked about in the agroforestry system, when you're pairing these trees, this tree creates shade and mulch, which this tree likes, you put them together. We're doing that on a larger scale for a whole site. Where do people move? How do they move? How do they interact with the space? Where are the chickens? How do they interact with space, and it's all about connecting the pieces together so that they have optimal relationships. We're really in the business of relationship creation. And then I just thought this slide was funny. So we've got some wild times right now and wild times ahead, and food is just skyrocketing in value, which is great if you're a food producer. But it's an interesting time, and Grandma survived because the supply chain was local and she knew how to do stuff. So let's do stuff. Oh, thank you. So we run the Caribbean Agroforestry Institute. This is our course in 2022, our permaculture design students, and we now have 2 of those students coming back to the island to move to the island and start their own project, as well as help other people with their projects. We're excited about those guys coming back. And if I can leave you with anything, even though there's a little added complication, what we're really looking for in these systems is biological diversity. Sterile systems create a lot of work and a lot of imbalance. A biologically diverse system, if there's tons of different insects, they create their own checks and balances. We don't have to worry about the aphids. We don't have to worry about the white flies. Those come in and overpopulate because the system doesn't have balance. When we have a lot more biological diversity of insects, of plants, of pollinators, of layers of shade, of soil microbes, we end up creating a lot of resilience, which is what we're looking for. We want a lot of abundance of production, and we want a lot of resilience in the system. So if that's all you get is add more things to your farm and garden, then we've done a good job. So that's the end of this slideshow. Does anybody have any questions before we move into the next?
There's a few questions in the chat, but while we're looking at those, maybe we can start to explore outside again. And so the next part, I think we're going to start to move. If you're facing the pool, right, and you look to the left, you'll see a bunch of stuff we've placed down the hillside. And give it a shot. I'll give it a few minutes, and then I can yank everyone down there. But yeah, there were like 2 or 3 questions I think up in the chat, Stephanie.
Okay, I can see them. So I'll start with, it's your question. Where the knowledge comes from. So a lot of knowledge comes from indigenous cultures and the way we used to farm before we had access to a store that had fertilizer, or before we had access to all of the chemicals that we do now that weed and that get rid of your weeds or what have you. So permaculture collects from every bucket it possibly can. So it's more just a collection of ideas, and then new ideas as well. People are playing with this a lot, and agroforestry has gotten, thankfully, very popular lately as we really start to understand, mostly through the collapse of monoculture crops. So, we saw this with the potato famine in Ireland. So why did that happen, the plague on the potatoes? Well, over time, those large plantations of potatoes ended up having one variety of potato, as far as the eye could see. Not even just, only potatoes, but one single clone of the same potato. And we're doing this with bananas. We do this with lots of different crops because it's simple. It's a simple design. You don't have to think about all the differences of different species and how they fit together, or you have a reliable production. They look the same, they're shelf stable, all the things we've been selecting for. And so what happens, though, is if a disease or pest comes into that space, every single plant is susceptible to it. And so it just wipes it out. And currently we're dealing with that with bananas, because bananas are usually clones, and they want shippability, they want size, they want high yield. They're not necessarily selecting for resilience. They're usually chemical systems. So these plants, one plague comes in and they're completely annihilated. So people are, I think, waking up to the value of diversity that we knew a long time ago was the right way to do it. And we just kind of forgot a little bit, and we're remembering. So that's awesome.
Cool.
Okay, climate change is climate change changing some of the plants used in local permaculture projects? It certainly is. And are there invasive species that actually prove useful? Yes. There's a great book called Invasive Plant Medicine. Invasive species are interesting. They, like in Puerto Rico, I don't know how many people are there, but we have a plant called the African tulipan. Locally, they call it a mayona. And so this tree is a very, very fast-growing, air quotes, invasive tree that moves into a system, but it doesn't move into an intact forest. There wouldn't be any room for it. It usually dominates after a space has been cleared, and then the space has been left. And this pioneer, instead of invasive, we will call them pioneer. This pioneer species will come in, grow very tall, create lots of shade so that there's microclimate for other things to grow, create lots of mulch, so we're rebuilding destroyed soils, and then it's going to fall over very, very easily in the wind. And this wood is so soft. A couple weeks after it falls over, it turns to like mush and just gets absolutely abundantly occupied with mushrooms and mycelium. And so it's really building that soil, allowing for the next thing to come through. And so that's, we just need to reimagine what invasive is. And a lot of times it's because of our actions and how we've treated a piece of land, and where we can, in agroforestry, we can utilize these pioneer plants. I like the dancing, Matt, whoever that was. That was fun. Oh, we got more dancing. So we're utilizing those plants in an intentional way to speed up the regeneration of a site and of soil. And we could have a whole session on that, but I'm gonna pop off it.
Really cool.
And see the next one.
So yeah, we set up this area with a bunch of stuff for us to dig into. You might recognize some from Stephanie's presentation. I tried to put some of the grasses over here when you were talking about slope stabilization. But we've got a lot to work with, and I know you have some stuff that you've done in real life, and we're going to try to do it virtually. We're in totally uncharted territory here, and I think doing permaculture is one of the most brave things we could try virtually. It's probably the hardest thing maybe to translate virtually, but we have an exercise where we're going to actually become a plant, and I'm very excited for this. So want to tell us how this works?
Sure. So you'll see the little plant cards, they're kind of big, all across the ground, and you'll see to your left facing the house, or if you look at the house, is a big chart, and that's mostly the trees and plants that we'll be working with on the cards. And so this is something we do in real life. We call it like plant speed dating. So the exercise is, and Nick, you can tell people how to pick them up. We want to see if we can go to a card. If you can't pick it up, that's fine. Just stand in front of it. I need to toggle this on. And we're going to ask. Yeah. Okay.
All right. You should be able to actually move the cards now. Be careful if you haven't done it before. It's a good way to do it is just to hold your left click over the card that you want to pick. And if you start to hold your left click and start walking around, you can actually bring it around with you. So maybe pick a card and take it somewhere. I'm not sure how we're going to do this. Do the speed dating pairs usually come up and spotlight so that you can start to talk them through it? Because I know I have sweet potato, but I don't know too much about like what other plants sweet potato gets along with.
Sure. And so if everyone takes a card, if you want to, and then we're going to have you meet up with another card that you think might be good together. So what we're looking for is a ground cover like sweet potato is going to be really nice around a tree like cacao that might want a lot of cover on the ground, but it's not going to get any when it's little. Eventually it'll get big enough that the sweet potato won't be there anymore. But you want to find someone who's not on your same level. Great. So
not on the same level in terms of the height that they grow?
Exactly. So strata is like the height that it grows, the space that it will occupy.
Oh, strata. We've got strata here. There's a landscape firm. We have Richard and everyone here from the Strata Landscape Architecture firm.
Oh,
Now I understand
well,
why you're
that's
called
perfect.
Strata.
What a great name. So find someone in a different strata and then join up together. And then we're going to try and see if we can have either one or both of those people in that group say who they are and why they think they would be a good pair. Because again, this is relationship building. If we do a really good job building relationships between plants and elements in the system, we're going to work ourselves out of a job, which is what we want. We just want to come and pick yummy or valuable things. So we'll give you a couple minutes to move
All
around
right.
and
I
find
see
a friend.
couple pairs forming. We've got mango and ginger, taro and papaya.
Okay. All
We've
right,
got
let's
a couple higher strata ones, maybe that are still left alone here. We got banana looking for a pair. Got a bunch of taller plants up in the corner here that could use some lower.
Put a banana with one of the trees. Is that sort of like a medium?
That's great.
Yeah.
Yep, that's great. Because the banana offers this like quick growth and quick shade, and so it's kind of like a nurse plant for your cacao or your baby mango that eventually is going to want sun, but it doesn't want sun when it's little. It's going to be too much. It's going to be too hard for it as a baby to be all out there on its own, and so we can utilize these other plants to create this rapid shade. Plus, your banana is going to produce a crop pretty early, so you get some return on investment. And then it also creates a lot of biomass because when you harvest a banana rack, you cut the whole stalk down, and it's this really juicy, wet stalk that you lay on the ground that feeds the soil and feeds the plants around it. So it's a great pair, really, for most things. Okay, if you're paired up and you're feeling brave, will you speak, or I don't know how people want to do chat or speaking.
Yeah, you can type or use the microphone if you want.
Voices.
If you want to use a microphone, you don't know how, there's a unmute button in the bottom left of your menu bar screen in the bottom of your screen.
Be brave.
Hello, someone said hi. If you said hi, do you have a card? You picked a plant?
Hello, Dennis here. I'm just wondering if taro and papaya would go well together.
They do go well. So taro is going to be an early season producer, so you're going to get that anywhere from 6 months to a year, depending on the variety. And it's going to punch holes in the ground with its roots, which is awesome for drainage. And the only thing you have to be careful with is the papaya has a pretty shallow root system. So getting enough space that you can harvest that taro without affecting the papaya. But the papaya is going to grow really tall fast with a really thin stem. So leave a lot of space around the understory to have other plants there that will get plenty of light. And the papaya is going to start yielding pretty much right after the taro starts yielding. So a year and a half, 2 years from like that point until 4 or 5 years, depending on your system. And so they're a great pairing specifically because their yield is stacked in time. So you're going to be able to get that food or that crop to sell in a nice timeline. Anyone else want to share their pairing and why they think they'd be good together?
Thank you, by the way.
You're welcome.
I see a couple
We can also shout them
threesomes here,
out.
and even like a cluster of
Ooh,
4
that's
up here.
good too. We can, if Nick, if you want to, if people don't want to share what their cluster is about, you can read them. I can't quite see them as well as you.
Someone asks, what about banana and coconut? We have banana and coconut.
Banana and coconut go great together, and think about how the banana grows and how the coconut grows. And so someone just said and cacao, coconut and cacao. That's having cacao with the banana and the coconut. Now we're really starting to build a system. So the banana is coming in early with the shade, coming in early with the biomass and the fruit production. The coconut's going to be much later, but much taller. Also a valuable crop. And all of those, then you move into the cacao. The cacao's very long-term crop. It's going to be there for 40, 50 years. Coconut as well. They occupy completely different spaces in, vertical space, and they support each other. So the coconut has this like really high dappled shade, which the cacao is going to appreciate. But neither one of the cacao or the coconut grow very quickly, so they're not going to create a lot of biomass or shade to begin with, and so you can have that banana really add. So you can see as we add more plants, more ecosystem services are done by the plants, so we don't have to do it. Anne mentioned cacao and sweet potato. I would plant the cacao and sweet potato together, or you can add in the cacao a little bit later. The sweet potato in that same system with the banana, with the coconut. Now you've got a ground cover. Now you've also got a crop that yields in 6 months, sometimes less depending on variety. It's also so that's going to allow you to cover ground so that you prevent weeds to some extent. It's also going to give you that valuable crop that you can sell or eat, which offsets the cost of the labor of moving through the space and making sure everything else is doing okay, because you can come through, plant the sweet potato, harvest the sweet potato. You do have to just kind of take in mind, okay, I'm going to be digging a sweet potato out, so I need enough space so that I'm not digging near the roots of this other plant. It's really important. The sweet potato also it vines across the ground. It doesn't grab like a vine, so it's not going to take the plant down. But depending on the size of the other plants, you just want to maybe keep an eye on it if your cacao is really, really small, or if your coconut is really, really small. But most of the time they pair great. So that's one of my favorite guilds for a system is the banana, coconut, cacao, and the sweet potato ground cover. Somebody's getting hungry. Me too. All right. So something I would add to this system, and I don't know if anyone picked it up, would be something like the pigeon pea, the gandule. The gandule or pigeon pea is going to be a nitrogen fixer. So I'll just explain that in case someone doesn't know. The nitrogen fixer is a tree that has a symbiotic, or a plant that has a symbiotic relationship with nitrogen fixing bacteria. And so it's a little root nodules that grow on their roots, and they help fix atmospheric nitrogen. And they're going to then release some of that into the system, especially when you cut parts of it down. So your gandule, while they do produce food, it's kind of a labor intensive. It's not that valuable. I don't really use them from a commercial perspective, but I use them for quick shade, to chop and drop mulch onto the site, and to release nitrogen. So I would be adding those into the system as well, so that that's our fertilizer element or part of it.
Very
Does
cool.
anyone else have a plant they want to talk about?
So I stole the nitrogen fixture as you were talking about it.
Awesome. There's another one in here called the ice cream bean, which is great.
Yeah,
Yeah,
why
they
is this
had
called
two,
an ice cream bean?
so I figured I took one.
The ice cream bean, or Inga machete, which is like a machete. So there's lots of different varieties of Ingas, but the machete is the big one. And so it's actually more like a cotton candy kind of texture. There's these big seeds in these pods, and there's all this fluff around the seed, and it's kind of like a really sweet ice cream flavored cotton candy. But they last a long time. They grow very tall. They create lots of leaf mulch. They fix nitrogen. So they're this like long-term overstory. If you have the right spacing, they're amazing in a cacao system as well, because they create all of this beautiful shade and leaf matter. And you can use these and chop them out of the system too. So something we do in the agroforestry system is if we have the planting material, especially things that are inexpensive to plant, we plant lots and lots and lots, more than you could ever imagine planting. And then all you're doing is going in and taking out when things are in the way, and that creates mulch, and that creates root diversity, and that creates soil stabilization. It creates all kinds of different things. And it also, some of these longer term trees, if you do the recommended spacing of your mangoes and then you lose 3 mangoes because of whatever, the root system wasn't strong, a cow came and took them out, now you've lost like 4 years when you could just plant a few more that are only a few dollars a piece and then thin them out if they all succeed. So we want to plant really densely in the early stages within reason of these different crops, and then all we have to do is come in with our machete or come in with our weed whacker or our gloves or what have you, and we can move these plants out, and you don't have to take them away. You just lay them on the ground, and they add so much soil diversity for the microbiome of the soil and the fungi in the soil. Yes, cacao grows really well in Puerto Rico, and there is the beginning of an industry, and if you guys want to know more about that, I'm involved with a group that's trying to help that, and we can talk outside of this, and I can give you some more information.
So it seems like so many of these plants get along well with each other in some way or another. Are there any that don't get along well or would need some extra help?
Yes. So one, it's spacing. It's understanding the plant's aerial development as well as its root development and your harvesting strategy so that you don't affect the plants around it in a negative way or create too much shade. Like if you use a ton of ice cream bean mango and you didn't manage it well, or you put it 2 feet away from a mango tree, that inga is going to grow much faster than your mango because it's all your nitrogen fixing trees grow really fast. They're really well adapted to not having a lot of fertility in the soil, and that's kind of why they're there. But without proper management or spacing, they would certainly overwhelm the slow growth of the cacao and just dominate the system. So you're looking for, like the diagrams you put on the ground there, we're still, although we have this like really diverse plant palette, there's still organization within the system. One, because it just makes harvesting and maintenance a lot easier, but we still have the spacing and the plants together in a way that they complement each other. So an entire row of inga would never have anything else in there. It would grow so fast, it would shade and mulch everything so heavily that nothing else would be able to live. So it's just the space and the timing, and then watching it. So you're going to do a good design. You're going to plant them in with a lot of education and understanding, and then you're going to, like the permaculture principle number 1, you're going to observe: is this working? Is everyone happy? Is someone dominating that we don't want to? Do we need to cut them back to feed the rest? Do we need to eliminate them from the system? So it's a lot of observation on the front end for the first couple of years, but that's why we have those other crops that help to pay for that labor and that observation and the tweaks to the system. Because by the time the system starts maturing 5 years, in a tropical climate, or 10 years in Colorado, we want that system to be really dialed so that we don't have any of that anymore, or as little as possible.
Very cool. This was really fun. Thanks.
Mature.
Yay. Yeah, you're welcome.
When you get to mature forest, that 5-year plus, the labor is significantly less at that point. If you've done the job correctly.
Significantly less. And so then you're more relying on, like, you'll have some pruning, periodic pruning, depending on the tree, especially in the tropics, to keep them small and keep them able to be harvested, so you don't have to climb, a 50-foot ladder. And you'll be coming into harvest, and then just doing periodic checks to make sure everything's on point, make sure there's no disease or pest issues. But if you've done a really good job in creating and mimicking a forest ecosystem with all that diversity, and your soil is so amazing because you've been dropping all these plants over a few years, there's very, very little issue as if there would be in like a monoculture system. So while monoculture might be simpler on the front end, it retains its same level of labor and time investment almost throughout its whole life, because you have to do all the fertilization, all the weeding, all the watering, all the stuff forever and ever. And in our system, we're stacking all that in the beginning with the right design and plants. And then we're able to phase out our relationship because we have other things in the system doing that job.
Very cool. Shall we actually put some plants in the ground? Maybe we could collect the cards.
Let's try it. I don't know how we're doing it.
If you're used to moving the cards around now, maybe let's bring them back over where they were in the side here and figure out what we're gonna do with the brave folks who are remaining. We have a bunch of plant props. We have some diagrams that show how we might plant. Of course, I think we'll actually have to talk about this as a real site too, Ryan, because I'm not sure where you're thinking about actually planting on your land. So another thing we set up is this is one type of level that Stephanie told us about the other day, which is called an A-frame level. A very simple way of determining the slope of the land, and I guess from there you would build out a terrace so that you have like flat terraces on the slope. Is that the idea?
So there's a few different ways to go, and depending on the area, rainfall, soil, percentage of slope, all these things, it's going to determine if you want to go right on contour, which means you're going to create a level line, or you want to do it slightly off contour to allow for water drainage, or down to allow for drainage, or up to slow it even more or send it to a different direction. So we're going to basically find contour is the first thing we're going to do so that we know where our level line is. At that point, you could decide if you would like to do an entire terrace, which would be a very, very wide bed that you can, have room to walk on. It can be very, very wide, or it can be small. Or in permaculture, we utilize swales and berms, which can be, not quite as flat as a terrace. It's more like a ditch and a hill, and that allows the water to sink into the hillside and spread out along the hillside, so it doesn't all run away every time it rains, and it collects organic matter in there. So there's some different strategies to go about it. An A-frame is kind of the easiest to build, the lowest technology version of a level, but a lot of folks have access to laser levels. Those work amazing. I really like water levels, which is basically two yardsticks with a water pipe in between them, and so water always finds level. So those are really great if you have a larger space to do, because you can have a 20-foot or 50-foot line between those. So those are really valuable. So we're going to think about, and Ryan, maybe you can tell us about the site a little bit. Ryan, do you want to tell us about the area here, like what percentage slope you think you have?
Sure. In the area that we're standing on now, could actually have some site work done to it because the buildings are here. But if you go further, basically from here all the way up the hill, there's a pretty consistent slope that plateaus a little bit at the top, and then I don't know, maybe at the most a 10% grade slope, I would say. Yeah, if you actually can follow me, we can even see a little bit of that. So we took a this is data from a site survey, which is a manual kind of GPS based site survey. And then we also have some data from the whole farm. That's from LiDAR data that we got from a public data set. But this whole area is from the actual manual site survey. And so this is very accurate. And so the slope you see here is pretty representative of a lot of the site. And so, we could basically follow the contours and do several different rows. Like here we could just kind of put rows all the way down the hill. And then this isn't really pictured because this is where the map ends, but basically it finishes at a very lush jungle and forest. And so where this cuts off, you
Someone
start to
fell
get
off already.
oh no. If you want to snap everybody back, Nick.
I'm pretty sure it
Plus everybody can see.
Do you want to bring people here or back where we were?
Yeah, snap everybody to here if you can, real quick.
Sure. Get ready.
There we go.
Okay.
Yeah. So this is pretty representative of the slope. Basically, up here at the top of the hill there's kind of like a cow path that goes from here all the way up to the top of the mountain, and it plateaus a little bit, like basically here. And then there's a slope that's maybe a 10% grade going all the way down.
Awesome. And Ryan, what's your soil like out there? Have you dug into it? Is it really clay or sandy or mixed? Do you hear that, Ryan? Hello?
He was using his mic on a different, like in the browser-based version, and he was navigating in VR. The browser just closed, so he's probably going to have to rejoin for his mic to start again.
Okay, no worries. So the soil, what the soil is made of, if it's high clay content and high sand content, is going to really affect a lot of things, but in this context, it's going to affect drainage. So how well the soil drains when it does get wet. If you're trying to do your contour lines, this is going to make
we
a
have
difference.
80 acres to work with. Are there certain things that when
Ryan,
we're
you had
talking
cut
about
out for
closer
a second.
to housing,
Hey, Ryan.
are there certain things that we should put in or should avoid?
Hey, Ryan, you had cut out actually for that whole bit. Also, while you cut out, Stephanie had asked you about the soil, if you had done any soil testing for your site.
No, did I cut out?
Yeah.
It's because your audio is coming in from spatial. Yes.
Did it cut out at some point?
Yeah, it was like probably 20 seconds.
The whole response to the question. There was no, we got none of what you just said. Zero.
Yeah.
It was right after you were talking about the elevation, capping out near this plateau and then going to a 10-degree decline. After that, your browser version closed for a second.
Okay, can you hear me now? Can you hear that?
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. It is. Also, your Spatian guide. That's very cool. That's awesome. I love that program. So someone asked if this is a twin, and it is in fact sort of a twin or maybe a sibling of a real project in Puerto Rico. So we have Ryan who's building the project in Puerto Rico, and then we also have one of the architects, the lead architect from Numina Architects here, Andrea, and then Stephanie, who's answering some questions about the landscaping aspect of the project. So yeah, it's pretty exciting. This could be a real place. I think technically it's called what? Spectra Residences, but what was your idea for this space, Ryan? Is it more like a retreat, sort of a retreat center, or?
Yeah, so it's a hospitality concept for group travel specifically. So groups of 10 plus people. These two structures combined have 18 beds, and then we might put some other villas on the site. But yeah, if you can hear me now, before it cut out, the main question I had for Stephanie was this slope here and in around here is close to housing. And I saw that on one of your slides, you said that permaculture has like zone 1, zone 2, and zone 3, depending on, like, I think it was how it relates to housing. And so are there some types of crops that we should, go for or avoid in context of planting that is relatively close to where the people are going to live? And so do you have, with the tropical species that you're working with, recommendations for things that are close? Because we do have 80 acres and we have other places that we can cultivate, but what should we think about as stuff that's close to the buildings?
Sure. So a zoning system in permaculture, you can think of it simply as how much does this thing need me, or how much do I need the thing? So we're talking about more like human movement at this point. So things that need you more would be like an annual garden, would be, animals perhaps, depending on how you build the system for them. Things that need you less over time will certainly be the orchard. The cacao forest with your mango overstory really doesn't need you a lot later in time. It'll need you in the beginning. But so we want to think about how much does the thing need us and how much do we need the thing. I would recommend near the house, you do any of your annual vegetables because those are the most needy, and they're the things that you're going to want to eat every single day, and they're yielding all the time. But also maybe a small food forest, which is a diverse food system, kind of like we're building with this agroforestry system, but maybe you want to do a small version of that with a lot of diversity so people can walk through it. Maybe your paths in this system are like windy and more like a park and more like this really sweet space with benches and gathering spaces in the shade of the mango. And so you're designing it more for everyday enjoyment as opposed to like a large agroforestry system. You're going to want to put that, in some semblance of rows just for efficiency of moving trucks through, of moving workers through, like more with this production kind of mindset, and closer to your house, things that you are going to want to interact with on a very, very regular basis. So they can be some of the same plants, but you wouldn't do 100. With 80 acres, you don't need to have 100 mango trees like right up on the house, but you might want 100 different fruit trees so that people can easily walk to them, see them, taste them, touch them, feel what it's like to be near them, and how they interact, and use it as an educational space or a gathering space, but a lot of diversity within a small space. And then you add your like broad scale applications of commercial agroforestry, if that's what you're going to do, in a place that allows for machinery and trucks and workers, which you wouldn't necessarily want right next to the house while people are trying to relax anyway. Does that make sense?
That makes a ton of sense, actually. I really appreciate that. So yeah, having it be a representative of everything that's on the site, having a kind of maximum diversity, don't necessarily worry about having it optimized for bringing equipment through it, because it's more about like a park setting and people exploring what's next to the buildings, and then being able to kind of sample everything that's on the farm. So yeah, I think
exactly. It also
that's really smart.
It also gives you a place to start to learn about the different species and how they grow and which ones you like and that do the best on your site so you can expand them. It also gives you a place to grow genetics. So if you want, for instance, I have turmeric, but I also have blue turmeric and yellow turmeric, but I only brought in a couple plants of those rare ones. So I have them really, really close so I can keep an eye on them and observe how they grow, and also so they don't get lost in like the bigger turmeric land. And then now after a season of growth, I'm going to have 100 turmeric roots of blue turmeric. So then I can take it and use kind of this closer diverse forest setting as your propagation zone, where you can take cuttings, where you can take seed, where you can take root divisions, and then spread them out throughout the rest of the farm if you like them and if they do well on your site. So it's a really amazing to have that like smaller version of the thing that you then expand.
That's great. And then you said some annuals. Does that mean thing like lettuces and peppers and tomatoes, or if we can grow them? Is it
like your regular vegetable garden.
Okay. So yeah, like we have, at least in this design, we have these kind of planting beds terracing down over here behind us. So those planting beds we could use as like a more traditional backyard vegetable garden, basically. It's high touch, and then we can do the agroforestry kind of where we're standing and further up the hill.
Exactly. So you want to have those veggies close by because they're a little bit needier, but they also, you're going to be utilizing them for breakfast, lunch, dinner. If you have a kitchen in there, you don't want people having to hike a mile to go get some rosemary for their breakfast eggs or something like that. So, and they're really, really high impact area, and then people can really you'll use them a lot more if they're close by. If they are a mile away, you're like, I can do without rosemary, no problem. I don't want to walk that far. So that's a great use for those terraces, is your veggie and your herb garden. So kind of think of it like your kitchen garden.
Yeah, that makes a ton of sense. Okay, that's terrific.
Very cool.
Do we want to try, in the time we left, we have a bunch of plants. Do we want to try to plant a row?
Yeah.
So
I
that we have been doing that.
So what do you think, Stephanie? Was this following sort of the concept that you were talking about the tall and the medium and the slow growth?
You got it. So we've got our bananas, which come in hot and fast and create a lot of biomass and shade. We've got our cocos that are growing up straight, creating that like emergent layer overstory canopy. We've got our taro, which occupies the root layer, but also creates all of this leaf foliage around the ground. We could throw in like our mid-story cacao. We could throw in our mango if we have them. That's going to occupy the high story, but not quite as high as the coconut. That's awesome. Then we would want to bring in, so you see we have all this soil, right? All this bare soil. Anywhere there is bare soil, nature will fill that space. So if you plowed and opened up the earth, nature's going to try, it's like an open wound. It's like it loses moisture, it dies in biological life. Nature's going to try to fill that as soon as possible, and it's going to fill it with those invasive or pioneer plants. It's going to fill it with weeds, so to speak. A lot of those have value, but they're usually not the value we're looking for, depending, unless you're an herbalist, and there's going to be all kinds of good stuff in there. But what we don't want is any bare soil, because you can pretty much guarantee it's going to get filled with weeds. So we either want plants or we want mulch. So leaves, wood chips, grass clippings. Cover the soil as quickly as possible. You're going to save yourself from the weed pressure, but you're also going to keep that biological life alive and that fungal life alive, which is really, there can be all the nutrients in the world in your soil, but it's the relationship between the plant and the soil microbes that unlocks those nutrients and makes them available for the plant to utilize.
Very cool.
Throwing in sweet potato is a great one here. You get that sweet potato in, it starts to grow all across the ground and cover the soil, which is what we're looking for.
Looks great.
Cool.
While I was talking, you were building that, and then I'm in VR and I turned around and I have this like forest behind me. It's pretty amazing.
Yeah, right. Didn't notice that, huh?
Yeah, unfortunately, it's going to take longer than that to do this on the actual land. But this is really, amazing.
Those things seem
for
like they grow pretty quick. You said what, 3 months or something? You'd start to get some growth, or
some of the stuff, yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, well, if you guys go back to the videos up by the pool, the one on maybe the second one is bare soil, like these swales, all on contour. Just we're maybe 2 degrees off because we want to let an overabundance of water run out. So you can see it's all bare with all of these contour lines. It looks kind of just like what you did here.
Yeah, that's what I was trying to copy.
It looks really good. And so then we have everything planted in. So the one main row you see with the bananas that are the most developed, that's about 3 months growth from bare soil. And so we went at the overstory long-term on that row is going to be our avocado, our jackfruit, our mangosteen, our starfruit. They're really little now. They're only maybe like 3 feet tall, 4 feet tall, but it's fully planted with cassava. It's planted with grandules for that nitrogen fixing, for that chop and drop biomass material, for the quick shade. Lots of bananas to create tons of biomass and shade and also food. There's also sweet potatoes in the row next door to help cover all of the soil in the open space between the tree row. There's also, we actually put ají dulce, which is a type of pepper that lives for 4 or 5 years. It's like a pepper bush, into the system. We also have papaya, which comes up and gives us food in 2 years. So we're stacking all the layers all at the same time so that the whole row in a couple months the ground is completely covered, and we have all of these plants that we can feed back into the system in place rather than me like taking a wheelbarrow and going to get leaves and then hauling it all the way over there. I can just chop in that system we have a Mexican sunflower, which is an amazing biomass crop. I see breadfruit's great. Breadfruit's an amazing plant in this system. They do utilize it a lot in Hawaii and agroforestry systems, and we could certainly do it in Puerto Rico. It's an amazing crop there. And there's a high value for it as well, because there's a company down there that does gluten-free flour, so they're always looking for more breadfruit. And then someone asked, are you mostly growing these from seeds or getting from a nursery? So it's a mix. If you seeds are cheaper. I plant a lot of seeds from fruit that I get at the market, at the like local stand. So I know that they've grown in that area and they're adapted to the area. I may or may not graft them later with like a choice cultivar, but I bring in as much as I can from as many places as I can to get the maximum diversity. A lot of times, actually, when I can't find something on island, which is frequently like a blue turmeric or the yellow turmeric, or it's hard to find because I don't know where the people are that are growing them. It's not like on the internet; it's hard to find them. But then I'll get them from Etsy or something like that, and then cultivate more and more of them. And we have a small nursery that we provide some genetics for some of our clients as well. And then we have some relationships with some amazing nurseries. Our group, Ryan, I don't think you were able to make it, but our regenerative agriculture group goes around to different farms and sites on the island and kind of does monthly meetups. And one of the ones we did was at a friend of mine's, Juan Miranda, who's an amazing, he's actually a physicist by night and a nurseryman by day. And he's got just some crazy, amazing, rare varieties of fruit trees, big too, nice size, great prices, and just some wild stuff. He's a great plant collector. So it's a place to go see for sure. Bring a big truck.
Can I ask about how animals fit in? And I guess specifically in the early stage, right now we have 50 cows that are grazing and keeping the jungle away. Once we start putting in some of these rows, do we have to not let the cows access that? Is there a point where they can be reintroduced? Particularly how cows and I guess other animals fit into building this ecosystem?
Sure. And so just like we did with the plants, we're like looking at the plant. What does the plant need? What does the plant provide? Is it, what does it eat in this frame of reference? How big is the animal? All those things are going to help us make those decisions once we really learn about the actions of the animal. Cows are pretty devastating to a young system, even if they like to eat a lot of stuff, but they also just are heavy and they step on everything and they'll just crush a baby tree in no time. So they'll need to be excluded from the system for a period of time. It also depends on what you're doing with your alleys and how well you've trained your cows to mind an electric line. So a lot of cows in Puerto Rico are free range and they just have the barbed wire. But in other places, it's called silvopasture, which is the integration of crops with animals. You would keep grass in the alleys in between the tree rows, and you would graze those alleys with cow or sheep, but they have to respect the electric line, and that takes a little bit of training, or the line has to be really, really spicy hot. And you can graze those alleys in between. But I would do that at a later time, or utilizing animals that you train to be respectful of the cacao.
Okay.
And I
So
see
the first.
I just said cacao because someone asked a question about cacao. So I'll read that. If cacao is being grafted instead of grown from seed, are there negative consequences in terms of resilience? So it depends. It's the taproot is what we're really concerned with, and cacao is amazing. Grafted cacao can just be these amazing varieties that have higher yield, better flavor, more dependable in lots of ways. The biggest concern with it is that taproot development. So if we are very careful, if our nursery is very careful, and we're very careful in the planting of the tree, we're able to retain that really strong taproot, especially in Puerto Rico because we're dealing with hurricanes and wind damage. So we really want to pay attention to the taproot is the longest root that goes down, one, to provide the best nutrients and water access and all that, but also it anchors that tree in. So we really want to make sure that we protect that taproot at all costs. And if you're buying trees, you want to look and make sure that taproot is nice and intact. In an agroforestry setting, though, we're already diffusing some of the wind power. So by utilizing the different layers of the forest, it all kind of works together to diffuse the energy of wind systems moving through and spread that force out a little bit. So you're going to end up with a better resilience overall in an agroforest as opposed to a monocropped system, and your soil structure and all these different things. I hope that answers that question.
Very cool. We're sort of getting near the end of our scheduled programming. I did want to try to maybe turn this workshop a little meta. So this is sort of the first time we've tried anything like this in terms of teaching both permaculture virtually, but also doing our first real project, sort of on the ground project with Spectra. And so, you know, being in a virtual twin of a real place. And so just thinking about sort of what can we learn from an environment like this? What do we need to be on site to do? And how, you know, what are your reflections of this workshop? You know, we could send out a survey afterwards, but it might be more fun to sort of have a discussion together about what did we get out of this? What can we improve in the future? What should we experiment with next? Really, that's what the Spectra community is about. So, yeah, did anyone have any thoughts about what went well, what could be better in the future? Obviously, you know, PowerPoint presentations always causing some issues, but you know, aside from that, I was kind of surprised how well a lot of it did translate. I usually think of like natural landscaping stuff as stuff that would not be as translatable virtually, but it was cool to see how the crops are organized, to be able to see that in 3D and sort of visualize the actual landscape after you're talking about it. It was really nice. Anyone else?
I'll go too. So I thought this was great. We've hosted a bunch of these and we've been experimenting with the format, and I think this one really stands out for me. Just thank you so much for bringing in so much great information. And then, you know, I thought the interactive elements were really good. You know, I think that she uses those cards, that card exercise we did. That's an exercise she does in person, and I think it actually translated pretty well in the virtual.
Yeah.
Like I've not done the in-person one before, but it worked. And then yeah, it was really awesome to see the row, kind of all like the stuff that's behind us now, basically materialize everything that you just talked about for an hour, and you can actually just see the forest. And once you actually see the forest, like, oh, like all those principles have just come to life. So yeah, thank you so much. It really worked. Really worked for me, and I hope other people feel the same way.
Yeah, getting some good responses. So, oh wow, someone's your first VR experience. Bit of a learning curve, but very impressive. Oh, very nice. That's great that you were able to join us in VR. That's awesome. We do have an email address, team@spectra.city, or you can email us feedback. And if you join our Discord channel, for those that are not in the Discord channel, we also have a feedback channel there. We'd love to hear your ideas for future experiments that we could do together. It's pretty exciting. There's a lot of cool virtual events here on Spatial. I don't know of very many that have a real life sort of output. So that's sort of the niche we're trying to experiment with. It'll be very nice to see, like, if this is actually built, and maybe we'll have a retreat someday. Actually check it out for real.
Ooh, that would be fun to plant it in person and get some of these folks to see it live.
Definitely.
Take it to a whole nother level. I appreciate it, Ryan. Nick, I teach a lot in the real world, and sometimes, you know, PowerPoint and digital presentations as well, but this really took it to a whole another level, but certainly not my forte. So for you guys to build this whole experience for me to not get my hands dirty again.
Thanks, Steve, for the feedback on the audio. That's definitely something that we'll have to work on. A lot of it's depending on people's different connections and stuff, but try to do our best. I'm glad that we have the text chat as well. It's been good to have people be able to ask questions who don't always have microphones set up. So yeah. Oh, thanks. Thanks, Ira. Yeah, and someone asked what type of projects is Spectra wanting to support, and I think that's a very open question for sure. Like we're very much like as a community looking to link up virtual world builders and people who build places in real life, or placemakers, architects, and so forth. And so, no matter your skill level or level of expertise, if you have an interest in the intersection of like the real world design and virtual design, that means you are part of our community. And we would call you a city modder. I know when you join Spectra, sometimes it asks like, are you a city modder? And that might sound a little intimidating, but that's just a name that we use to talk to anyone who's interested in the intersection. Because I know there's a lot of real world builders that don't want to have anything to do with virtual space, and there's a lot of virtual builders that are sort of off in virtual world and don't really care about the real world, but we're sort of like the ones that care about both. So if that's you, definitely pitch us an idea, and we'll see. It's pretty much the capacity of the community members, what we can take on, and in the future, hopefully, to continue to develop and be more like this decentralized group that can undertake different projects. Because the more skills that we build together, the more we can start to undertake different projects together, and in the spirit of this sort of decentralized community. CaribbeanAgroforestry.org. Stephanie just dropped the website. Is a nonprofit that I think accepts donations. We also have a recording of this talk. If you want to find it afterwards, it's in the announcements channel in our Discord. All of our past talks and workshops are on our YouTube page on the live tab, so you can also check up on what we've been doing.
Yeah, and join our Discord as well, or email newsletter, just to keep in touch. I definitely want to do some hands-on and take this virtual to the physical, probably at the end of this year or early next year. And so maybe we'll have some sort of follow-up to this where we actually do some plantings, and then maybe take what we plant and then bring it into the digital again. And so yeah, this was just the first step, and thanks everybody for coming out.
Oh, and another thing, this is actually kind of part one of a workshop series we're going to do about this scene right here. So the second one we're hoping to do at the end of August, towards the end of August, and it's going to be on interior design. So we're going to move from the outside here into the actual buildings and talk about sort of interior design topics. So if that interests you, if you are an interior designer, definitely reach out. We'd love to find someone like Stephanie for the interior design realm to help us explore that. So yeah, keep in touch. The event's up on our Discord, and we'll also be up on LinkedIn. LinkedIn is a great place to follow us if you have it. We'll post all our events there as well. So let's give a big clap with a C key, and you can even dance with the number keys if you want. Dance party under the agroforest, anyone? And we'll see you back next time. Thanks again, Stephanie. It was amazing.
You're welcome anytime.
I'm going to lock the space now so that people don't build a parking lot while we're gone. Let's see. Thanks to the Spatian Guide, too, for helping us out today. It's good to have you guys floating around. Moderators. All right, it should be locked for non-hosts now. So yeah, thanks again, everyone. Thanks for helping set up, Matt.
See you next time. Thanks.
See you around.